Okay, here it goes again on FEMA. I'd like to ask the panelists a question about FEMA reimbursements. First of all, what is your experience in FEMA reimbursements? And if you look ahead to what you anticipate from FEMA, if there's some kind of need to get reimbursement, if there is unfortunately a disaster in your field, do you expect that they would pay for the total, out of the total cost, 75% of the cost of those particular facilities?
Well, why don't you?
Sure. Have you looked at past reimbursements? Have they paid for 75%?
Senator, coming into this hearing, I haven't done extensive research on the history here, but I can just tell you anecdotally from living through a couple of events. One, my counterpart usually on emergency response stuff is through the Federal Highway Administration.
Right.
And typically what has happened both in the instance of the Napa earthquake that occurred and the washout of the I-10 freeway in Southern California, when those two events occurred, the FHWA released short-term dollars of about $2 million in the first 48 hours and announced that that was accessible for the state. Repairs in both facilities, both instances went beyond that, and so there is a requirement for the state. We will later access emergency relief dollars on a reimbursable basis. So there is there is a requirement that we spend quickly to get things done, and then we can access reimbursement. It also is dependent on what the facility is. Is it a federal interstate facility? Is it a separate state facility? When you are repairing it, are you simply repairing it to exact standards it was at, or are you improving it beyond that in any way? Those kinds of things affect the reimbursement rate, and they are often they are often subject to dialogue
a lot of
after
times they reimburse replacement
after the fact,
replacement, but not to current standards.
No betterment. No betterment. Right.
They don't have. They replace the cost of the existing facility. If it was built in 1940s or 50s, they'll replace it to the cost of that facility, but they won't reimburse it to the cost of the current, say, seismic standards, professional engineering standards.
So there are some instances where we've had full reimbursement for work on federal interstates in disasters. The concern that I was expressing in the lack of any exception in an emergency situation is if we have a catastrophic event that requires great additional state spending, even if we're going to seek reimbursement at some point, we may have to act in a way that might be benefited by the ability to issue revenue bonds on a short-term basis.
And I unfortunately, and once again I don't want to dwell on it, have extensive experience because in the 80s, my 9 years on the city council, we had the 100-year storm in the first 6 weeks, and then we had the earthquake that destroyed 60% of the square footage in our downtown with 13 months to go. And when you say what's your experience with reimbursements, those incidents were 7.5 years apart, and we were not fully reimbursed from the first one at the time the second one hit.
Totally.
And also anecdotally, it turned out we had a few redwood pipes under the downtown.
Really?
Would only restore to the level of redwood pipes rather than to modern pipes where there was that damage. And so it speaks to exactly the nuances. I think with regard to this initiative, there are questions about, because when we were hit by the earthquake in 1989, obviously so was San Francisco, so was Oakland, so was Los Gatos, so was the city of Watsonville. And in the aggregate, with state government, I mean, if you just look at the road system, we had 5 major transportation corridors in and out of the county, and 4 were closed in the days after the earthquake. There was only our coastal access to the north. That was the only way in or out of the county on a state highway. So the question is the aggregate a threshold of this a bond? And yes, natural disasters are exempted, but if you're issuing revenue bonds in the short term because nothing comes in time to deal with the reimbursement, is there any of it that triggers any of this that might not be? And is it in the aggregate? Is the entire road system, the entire municipal part? And then when I was listening to the proponent's testimony, he was just very glib about how natural disasters were exempted, but the energy crisis didn't fit that category.
Right.
So when you're talking about issuing $8 billion of bonds to keep the state from going under electricity-wise in a matter of days, that did not fit that definition. So it's just there's just a lot of uncertainty, and it's a question of how it fits what you're talking about.
Thank you.
And the ability to claw this back. I mean, you got one guy who's mad, who's done a bunch of ads, who apparently has a certain projects he's focused on. He's taken the entire, there's been no significant challenges of consequence. You have a brilliantly conservative system of finance that works, where you've got all sorts of reserve accounts and bond insurance and belts and suspenders. I don't know if you ever drafted a trust indenture. In my old days, an old bond lawyer, I did a ton of them. And these guys cut this thing 400 ways from Sunday. They're so conservative. And no lawyer will write an opinion unless there's absolutely no risk, because they don't want to subject their law firm to liability. So I asked you about your law firm. You know, no one wants to do that. And so you've got this system that works. And so we're putting lipstick on a pig by saying we're going to call it voting. And so voting, and at the same time, when I served in government before, what happens was I had a commission on initiative reform. I worked on this many years as outside of government. And you've got this tension where the people want a voice, but then they're mad when there's too many things on the ballot. Why do all you people leave this on the ballot? Now, of course, your argument is you can take it off the ballot, but that's not going to happen. And then you're going to have, of course, the people at Stanford not voting on a project for Cal, and the people at USC not voting on a project for UCLA. I mean, it's going to get irrational when, in fact, I think what Secretary Laird said was really on point about this notion of government where you want to move to beneficiary pays, where there's no obligation of taxpayers, yet you obfuscate this with this notion of a right to vote, when in fact it has this unbelievable chilling effect on established, thoughtful, intelligent, risk-averse financial structures that are managed by really smart people, that we see no evidence of a big issue. The only question appears is that this seems to be an indirect way, with probably something that polled really well, to be able to get at a couple of projects. You know, if the notion is about transparency, in my judgment, just tell the truth and go after them. Just go after them, whatever you want to go after. But don't throw this unbelievable tradition of richness and put it at risk, because the reality is, let's assume you're right. This is not, to me, like Prop 13, which was a philosophical question, or even Prop 26, which had to do whether something is a tax or whatever. This is upsetting the apple cart of a very, very established system that works extremely well to get at a couple of projects that is utilizing something that could potentially poll well. Now, the real harshness of that, it is, I found in my many years involved in public life, is this larger notion of clawing it back. Let's assume we found out we were wrong. How do you go back to the people and say, golly gee shucks, we were wrong, we're taking away your right to vote? This is a very delicate thing, and all I can say to the proponent, if he's listening, and to his lawyers to appeal to their patriotism on something like this is not a D versus R problem. This is a fundamental economic question of established structures that work throughout the globe. And we're going to put it up on the apple cart, throw it upside down because we have the right to vote on it. And it just concerns me. And you know, I don't want to get lost in the couple of projects that are at issues. This is a long-term constitutional shift. And the question is it the right thing to do, and are we really solving a problem?
Can I have the other two people maybe answer my question?
Yeah, please. I'm sorry. I thought you had answered.
That's all right.
My comment on
I'd like to hear your comments.
Theme on more anecdotal. I arrived at the University of California in 2008. We began constructing our UCLA replacement hospitals way before that.
Yes.
I was still bridging a FEMA line 2010, 2011, so it gives you a sense of the payment mechanism and how slow the reimbursement structure is with FEMA, and not definitely made whole. So the time span was extensive and long, and we actually had to incur additional costs to bridge the costs of constructing the hospital while we were receiving funds from FEMA.
Okay.
And I would just say, as Secretary Kelly said, I didn't really do extensive research on the FEMA question before coming to hearing today. Generally, they're interacting with locals or homeowners, but I'm happy to go back and ask some of our units what their experience is and provide you with that information.
Yeah, I think, there's a concept in financing called moral hazard, and I think it might apply here. It's accepting a higher risk that would otherwise not be taken because the government entity or the individual does not bear the full cost of the failure or catastrophe that might occur. And I think if we say, well, we don't have to worry, SEMA will reimburse us, that is increasing the moral hazard. And I'd like to know, I'll just say the Cypress collapse, the Bay Bridge, if we really, I know we got some money from the federal government. There's other projects, hospital projects, other kinds of projects that have happened in California. And then you look ahead, it seems like we should repair things, and it would be much less expensive to repair things and replace things that are hazardous. That's what the Alquist law was about. My predecessor, many years ago, the great Senator Al Alquist, wrote that law to prevent hospitals from failing, emergency rooms and trauma centers to fail. And we spent a lot of money in our county building our hospital to a significantly high earthquake standard. The new hospital in Valley Medical Center, it was hundreds. It'll be when we finish, it'll be billions of dollars. Just that one hospital, public hospital.
Wow,
billions. The full project. So I think those things are necessary to protect the citizens of California from the impact of those kinds of disasters and unfortunate impacts on the economy of California as well. So it seems to me that taking moral hazard is not an appropriate strategy for government. Increasing risks is not an appropriate strategy. So I'd like any information regarding FEMA, and I think we have to observe this and how this initiative, where we say the beneficiaries of the product that you're giving benefits and pays for it versus the general taxpayer, if somebody else pays the cost, does that allow sort of an increased risk in any case? So I think that's very important to look at with this initiative, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman's both.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman's. Yeah. Mr. Moore, quickly, then we're going to change out the panel.
Okay, well, I was going to ask Secretary Laird 2 questions and Secretary Kelly 57 questions, but I'll drop it for now then. I will say this, since you have stepped on your soapbox, Mr. Chair. One of the rules we had when I was treasurer for the county was the trend is your friend. And we're seeing some interesting trends in this country. I don't think we've been really fully cognizant of this anger level that's coming about. And certainly the presidential primaries have really baffled even the pundits as to where everything has been going. So, Mr. Chair, when I'm in my district and I mention high-speed rail, the audience actually groans. They just actually moan when you mention high-speed rail. The tunnels, I think Orange County is pretty neutral. It's like it's not something you can touch. When they hear about the Bay Bridge, we can just want to scream. So I see this ballot measure as a clever reaction. And I see it as a barometer. It should be real interesting in November to see, with all the other unpredictables, what's going to occur. So I can see this as part of the trend, people getting frustrated with government and what's going on. and not being listened to. I see this as an incredible approach. So I'm looking forward to the opposition in the next panel to hear their comments. But I can see why this would occur. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your patience and your testimony here today. Very, very much. Okay, the next panel. Lauren, he's got to go. He's up first. Lauren Kay from the California Chamber, Cesar Diaz from the State Buildings and Construction Trades Council, and Tim Quinn, the Association of California Water Agencies. Lauren, why don't you start out?
Have a little yin and yang. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lauren Kay with California Chamber of Commerce, along with State Building Construction Trades Council. We're formed the committee that's opposing this measure. We appreciate you and Chairman Gomez having this hearing today. It's been very informative, very thorough. It's shed a lot of light. This last panel was great. So was the treasurer. As such, I'm going to be able to make my remarks very, very brief.
Thank you.
Because I think that we can associate ourselves virtually comprehensively with what the treasurer, the administration, University of California had to say. We're pleased that the opposition to this measure also includes the governor of California, the comptroller, Betty Yee, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, former treasurer Bill Lockyer, and that's just, I'm sure, just the start. So I want to make a couple of points of emphasis where things may have not been entirely clear. On disasters, it was, in our opinion, utterly irresponsible for the proponents to leave out, to not exempt natural disasters. It's baffling. I mean, even Paul Gann included natural disasters as an exemption to the original Prop 4 spending limit, and every fiscal measure since then has recognized that California is uniquely exposed to natural disasters, and we have to deal with them. We have to deal with them quickly, and we have to protect people, and we have to fix things. I was in the governor's office both in 1989 and in 1993, and not only are the disasters a disaster in the making, but it takes forever to get your money, and you can't wait for it. But to the point of this measure, an $8 billion recovery from a major earthquake in the Bay Area that gets delta levees, water facilities, transportation, all of which can be repaired, toll bridges, with revenue bonds. An $8 billion disaster is not out of the question. The USGS says there's a 62% chance of a 6.7 magnitude earthquake or more within the next 25 years. And so this is something that is going to happen, and not have an exemption for natural disasters is utterly irresponsible. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was projects. The proponents were really, I thought, kind of blasé about how this whole projects definition would get worked out. Oh, the courts will take care of it. As the legislative analyst and Department of Finance signs that letter too. The legislative analyst said, "We don't know what a project is." Well, that's right. We don't know what a project is. It could be 2, or it could be 200. We just don't know. But leaving this to the courts, it's a cop-out. If the legislature had drafted a bill like this, it would be a dereliction to leave such an important part of the core part of this measure, what is a project, utterly undefined. And the assumption that was in your colloquy on this was that, well, the courts will deal with it, and it'll be in good faith, because the courts will work it out. That's not how it works. And I'd like to talk about CEQA. Because that is probably the best current example of where the courts are week after week after week determining what a project is. So And the proponents sat up here and say, well, we know what a project is. It's this project. Well, in CEQA, the courts have said, just recently, just in the last couple of years, they said, well, a fireworks parade is a project. Earlier, they said a bus fare increase is a project. Well, maybe there are people in the state who actually believe those are projects, but that's what courts do. They decide these things on a case-by-case basis, and I think it's terribly dangerous and putting a terrible burden on the courts to, in effect, make a legislative decision. Okay, the other CEQA point, though, that I make is that litigation is not just, well, we'll sort of figure out what this means, and then everybody will know what it is. No, that's not what litigation is around CEQA, and that's not what litigation is when it comes to public projects in California. Litigation is about leverage.
Right.
Litigation is about intimidating a project proponent into giving you what you want, and CEQA is the great tool of litigators. Well, you know what? This is going to become the next tool. We don't know what a project is, so every litigation proponent, every NIMBY, everybody who wants to get a little piece of that project is going to say, I think it's a project. And, we can connect it up to these other things. And, yeah, it's local, but, there's a JPA. And, we can connect it up here, and it's $2 billion. And, boy, you better give us what we want, or we're going to sue to make the legislature put this on the ballot. And, that's just irresponsible. And that may not have been their intent. But I tell you, looking at the California litigation environment, and especially CEQA, over the last 10, 20 years, that's where this will go. So thank you very much for this hearing, the chance to get all this great information out. We've got a couple other, Cesar and Tim can give you their views as well.